And that's the great thing about shiitakes is they produce for 5, 6, 7, 8 years sometimes, according to the diameter of the log. If the diameter of the log is approximately 6 inches, you can kind of guesstimate that you're going to get about 5 to 6 years of production out of those. So it's a long-term food source. I always tell people that fungi are like the highest quality vegetable you could ever get a hold of.
This show is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs. Mountain Rose Herbs is committed to putting people, plants, and planet before profit in everything they do. They work hand in hand with farm partners to provide the highest quality organic herbs, spices, extracts, teas, essential oils, and DIY fare. So please visit mountainroseherbs.com for all your herbal product needs. Okay, here we go with Herbal Radio.
This week's episode features Christopher Parker. Christopher is a farmer, educator, myco-culture keeper from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and the author of the new book, The Mycelial Healer.
Our farm's in western North Carolina, so about 30 minutes north of Asheville, so in the next county up.
Okay.
Our county borders Tennessee, so we're kind of right on the spine of the Southern Appalachians.
Yeah,
And so,
I was just there a couple weeks back. I was in Asheville.
Oh,
So,
great.
yeah, it was just lovely. Got to go up and hang out with some forest farmers there, and did some video, and it was just so I grew up in the Appalachia, so it was just kind of back with my people.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's just lovely. But I miss the smells the most, I think, especially the fall smell in the Appalachias. It's so unique. The Pacific Northwest has such amazing smell as well with all the pines and different things, but there's something about the oak leaves, I think, when they're starting to turn, they just kind of, and the maples, it's just amazing.
Yeah, there's that. One of I grew up here and have visited a bunch of other places, but I always, every time I moved away, like I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, then I moved to DC, and I was just like, nope, coming back. So it's just, there's so many other beautiful places on the planet, but it's amazing here. But, like you said, the fall, especially, it seems like the soft rain,
the
smell of the leaves,
there's
something very distinct about that.
Yeah.
Just like you can't really describe it,
even the sound. I was up in the mountains and we were doing some filming and it was really quiet, and it was the sound of the leaves falling.
Yeah.
And I just forgot that sound until I was there and I was around it, and it just I don't know, there was something about it. It just made my brain just settle way down and felt calm. Just felt so calm. It was just that subtle sound of those leaves hitting the ground. It was just amazing.
Well, I'm sure too, like with someone who's raised in the Appalachians, whenever you move away and you've been gone for a certain period of time, then you come back, it's almost like those childhood memories that are logged in.
Oh yeah.
Those just come rushing back.
I drive my wife crazy because sometimes to put myself asleep, I have the Appalachian sounds that have the whippoorwill. Because when I was a kid, I just, that I heard that all night, you heard the whippoorwill calling and
right.
Because our house was right up next to a pretty big forest, and it was something I would just fall asleep to. I'm trying to find the perfect essential oil blends to kind of get that Appalachian fall. If I can come up with that, I think that's going to be a great formula.
Oh, you're good. Yeah. You'd knock it out of the park if that was the case.
And this mushroom, I don't know, is it mushroom, here in the Pacific Northwest, everybody's out right now gathering mushrooms, and I'm assuming there's quite a bit of mushrooms that are happening in Appalachia as well right now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So, what part of the Appalachians did you grow up in?
I was in Kentucky.
Kentucky. Okay, yeah. So,
Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah, that's it's pretty comparable to here, but it's everything's so seasonal. And I know the Northwest is quite different. And, I have a lot of friends who have lived there, moved here, or people who are from there and moved here, or people I know in the mycological community that are from there.
Yeah.
But right now, so it's gotten very dry. So maitake or in Cherokee we call them wishies.
No.
That's a really it's my favorite mushroom, first of all, but it's out now. So usually the beginning of October, last of September, beginning of October, you start seeing those. You also start seeing oysters. You'll
Yeah.
find stuff like bluets, stropharia, or the
Mhm.
garden giant. Those are pretty prevalent. And and other boletes like birch boletes, etc. There's a lot of different mushrooms that are coming out now, and so it's succession after succession of
Ugh.
fungi from the time
Yeah.
morels start. And
Yeah.
then, obviously there's the perennial mushrooms, the perennial polypores that are out all year,
Mhm.
but the good edible ones, they're just it's one succession after another, and you get a little bit of bleed over or a little bit of overlap between those seasons. But there's a lot of my internal calendar typically goes with whatever, and there's a name for this, and I don't remember what it is, but I was just turned on to it last year. But I'm like, oh yeah, when the dogwoods are in full bloom,
Mhm.
that means that morels are out,
Mm.
wood nettles are starting to emerge.
Yeah.
Catfish are coming out of their winter slumber, and they're
Yeah.
really starting to
Yeah.
tear up the bottom of the riverbed. So it's time to
Right.
get out and catch catfish. It's time to get out, and they're like, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that." Noticing all of those things that are
Right.
happening together, those indicators. It has a name, and I don't remember what it is. And I'm like, "Yeah,
Oh.
we just call it paying attention."
Oh,
You know?
right, 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 right. No, I wanna know what that is now. I'm gonna have to look that up. That's really interesting. I always think of the turkeys gobbling, you
Oh
know?
yeah,
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 when the turkeys start to gobble, it's like, "Oh, yeah, that was the time I knew the morels were out at that point," when they
mm,
first yeah, that was kind of that indicator for us. So, um, that's that springtime, you start to see some of that first early green happening.
right.
It was like, yeah, and it just again, and that smells again, talking about the smells, there's just something about that smell at that point. You could kind of just go out and be like, oh yeah, this is when it's happening, right? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, I have a distinct memory. So I have a my on my father's side of the family, I have an uncle who's like maybe a year and a half older than me. And we grew up together, more like kind of how I grew up with my cousins. And I said something to him, like we were riding with my grandma one time, and I said, "Oh, it just rained, and I could smell it." That's how I knew it had rained because we were little kids. And he was like, "Let me." The first thing he said was, "Let me smell," and he rolled down the back window, of the car to stick his head out of the window to smell because he knew just the same as I did that, like, oh, you can tell it just rained by the smell.
yeah, yeah,
It wasn't anything anybody had to tell us. So it's that
right,
same thing that you're talking about with that fall.
yeah,
It's a distinct smell. The summertime rains have a different smell.
right, right. I learned recently that humans evolved to have like these unique receptors for that rain smell. And that
Mm,
we are one of the, I think one of the we are the highest as far as animals go, as being able to smell rain. Like
wow.
yeah, yeah, you could it's just something that we evolved to have those unique receptors. So why that everybody can smell rain. It's like, no, we evolved to do that because we needed to be able to smell where the rain was coming from.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm curious about what that served us. I don't know if that's
Well, I
if that.
think when we were on the dry savannas, you
Mm,
know, that when it rained, that was important, not only for the water, but also like that was going to bring the animals into that area as well. And so I think us being able to, evolve to have that ability to smell something and to smell the rain and know where it's coming from and get there. So,
right.
yeah,
Okay. And perhaps there were like seasonal pools that would fill up with water, and we had the
sure.
opportunity,
Absolutely.
to
Right.
keep us from,
Right.
dehydrating and dying.
Yeah. Well,
So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Okay. That makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it made sense. I was like, "Oh, that's why, of course, everyone talks about, just smelling the rain. You can, like, be out there, the wind kinda blows in that certain way, and you can
Mm.
smell, and you'll be like, 'Oh, there's rain coming,' Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
So
good. That's interesting. I've never really even thought about that. I just, I
yeah.
haven't really even had that conversation with people. So,
Well, I think
um,
that it's, we we've kinda lost that a little bit maybe, our connection with nature, like, our ability I think that we as humans are so much more connected to nature, and if we're able to maybe relearn how to listen. I often think that, like, if we can just relearn how to listen to nature and what it's trying to tell us, but we've kind of closed our ears off to it, or closed our senses off to it a little bit. Um, I think because of, we're getting more and more into a society that we don't need nature as much, but but maybe we're finding that, oh wait, no, we actually do need nature just as much as ever. And, you know, that's kind of how I think about it.
Right. It's almost that thing that, like, more and more I think about this aspect of what you're talking about is that, as opposed to us needing fire and fire being that central core of a house or a home
Yeah.
or a shelter,
Yeah.
we've replaced
Right.
that with electricity and the TV.
Hmm.
And you see people even set their living rooms up to focus on the TV because
Yeah.
that has, the fireplace in a cabin or something, that would be the focal point. And
Yeah.
we have shifted that since we have electricity. And so a friend of mine and I talked about this years ago about people who are fire signs tend to be like if their son, like if they're a Leo or so, they oftentimes will be attracted to welding, or would have potentially been like smiths back in the day, like
Sure. Sure.
and they would work in iron and fire and stuff like that. But now, since we have all this electricity, they tend to be welders, or they
Yeah.
are attracted to that in that way. So that element of fire that was a very important part of our evolution and our humanity has now been replaced with electricity.
Yeah.
So that conversation led me to think about the things with nature, like you're just talking about, on how we have replaced our modern amenities. Like, we have a weather app that tells us when it's going to
Right.
rain, as
Right.
opposed to being outside.
It's
So we've
it's
replaced the
yeah.
addiction
Yeah.
of being outside and being obsessed with when all these things are going to happen, because, well,
Yeah.
first of all, they're important for survival, but
Right.
secondly, we've just replaced that with a bunch of other modern type of equipment.
Right.
um
Well, you think about, I remember growing up, and my grandpa would show me, the leaves turning over, that rain was coming,
yeah.
like being able to spot that and seeing that the leaves are turning over a little bit, and that sort of thing. And another thing that's interesting, and you were just talking about with my grandfather. I remember once he told me that he knew the reason why that people were getting divorced more often than when his generation, and he was the World War II generation. Um,
Mhm.
and I said, "What was it, Grandpa?" And he said, "Well, he's like, when we were young, we just sat in front of the fire, and that's how you went on a date. You just, like, you went, and you went to the girl's house, or they come over, and you sat in front of the fireplace and watched the fire." And he said that you needed that fireplace, you needed that fire to fall in love. And I was like, "Oh,
Mm.
that's so beautiful." I don't know if it's the exact reason, but
I
but
think he's onto something, though.
he
I
might
think,
be. He might
yeah.
be. That's. But it's really interesting that you talked about that. That, of course, like, we evolved with fire. Fire is so important.
Well, I think it's also, and fungi play a part in this too, as far as moving into colder climates,
Yeah.
and as opposed to living near the equator, you oftentimes have all the materials that you need. But moving into northern climates, you had to adapt
Yeah.
to your environment, and you also had to utilize more of those tools around you. Like,
Right.
carrying fire and driving wind and snow was more
Mm,
important. It was a matter of life and death. And so
yeah.
that fire, the reason that fire was such a central part of it. And then, like, as he said, people don't sit in front of the fire, they sit in front of the TV. And it's just
Right.
like, and TV's used as a tool. It's used as a tool to manipulate people.
Yeah.
And we see that in our society now, like with social media being having a
Oh,
bigger
absolutely.
impact on
Right.
on
Right.
people.
Right. Yeah.
People saying things they would never say to your face.
Of
They
course.
would not
Absolutely.
say things to your face. It's,
Right.
and it's causing, and it's I really truly feel like it's being used as a tool to continue to divide us even more. Uh,
Yeah. Well, there's a lack of community that's happening, even
yeah.
though we're more connected in a lot of ways. Um, that community is lost because it's not that one-on-one with each other kind of connection where, you get to look somebody in the eye and talk with them. It's like you're kind of hidden behind that wall of social media, or that wall of the internet, and you don't get to actually communicate with people. And I think that's, we're really, really struggling with that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big advocate of going to talk to people who you don't necessarily agree with, especially your neighbors.
Of
Um,
course.
and I'm surprised. I'm so surprised at people who don't do that. And and I'm sure where you're originally from in Kentucky, like here in Asheville in Western North Carolina. I mean, since I was a kid, I've seen such a huge change, but it's an influx of a lot of people,
Mhm.
and they don't want to interact with the people that were born and raised here and who've been here for generations. They don't want to
Yeah.
interact with them. They just want, they want the 20 acre, or they want their house and a couple acres so they can do their, little farming thing, or, their, whatever they want to do, but they don't want to talk to the people who they don't agree with.
Right.
And,
Right.
Helene was a big kind of eye opener for a lot of people here, because a lot of people came together, regardless if they were on the
Yeah.
left or the right or the
Right.
center.
Right.
And it's just really beautiful to see that humanity come out in
Yeah.
people, you know,
Yeah.
regardless of they didn't care. They're like, what do you need?
Right.
It's not like, how do you vote? you know, so,
Whose side are you on?
right,
Right?
right.
No, 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 no. We're just on the side of people like needing to survive, right? We're just people that
Yeah.
need to like to move forward. That's the side we're on. And yeah, and it's so sad that it takes a tragedy like that to bring people together, but sometimes that is the case.
Hmm.
That's what happens. Um yeah, I was when I was there, I was still I had not seen the devastation. So it's pretty scary to see even now. And that's been what, 1 year since that came through, right?
Yeah, just barely over a year. And, there's some of the play. So I had someone ask me, because I sell mushrooms and stuff at a couple tailgate markets. And, I had someone shortly after Helene, maybe 2 or 3 months after Helene, come by and be like, hey, you're local, you grew up here. Would you like to talk about Helene and what you think? And I'm like, yeah, I think that the biggest takeaway from this should be, how do we interact with our floodplains differently?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is not new. It's not going to stop. Um, Humans have had a big impact on our environment, and I do believe that we have had an impact on our climate in a lot of different ways. Um, and I was like, we just need to interact with our floodplains differently. And what I saw was people freaking out after Helene to just build back as quickly as possible.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I'm like, those floodplains should not have residential areas or industry, so that these pollutants, petroleum, whatever chemical compounds, then just get washed away, or even, water waste treatment areas. And I understand, like, water waste treatment is a good thing whenever you have a dense population. It's important so you don't end up with a bunch of human pathogens floating around.
Right.
But, there's different ways to approach that now. And I think that we're technologically advanced enough that we can find more sustainable solutions,
Yeah.
instead of using our clean water to defecate in.
Right. Right.
Um, so it's just like, turn all these floodplains into like food forests, turn them into
There you
food
go.
forest.
Which
And
is
yeah,
something that you're really I mean, you have forest pharmacy, right? And that's sort of um
yeah, that's the name of our farm. And, we're all about, the woodland medicinals, producing fungi, and
mhm.
also, diving it more into such a budding science is, soil biology. And and of course I have a pretty heavy tilt towards, fungi being the solution. But I
Sure.
know there's other organisms. There's bacteria. There's like arthropods. There's all sorts of things that interact. within that system. And that's part of it, is using our farm here as, you know, as a place of study, really, and a place of experimentation,
Yeah.
and not going with the typical model of science of where it's reduced down to this one compound. It's like we have to take the whole into consideration, because without all the other aspects of it, like, you know, then we don't develop as creatures or beings. We're not islands. We're way more other cells than we are human cells. And it's the same
Right.
for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's all about the balance.
Uh-huh. So I'm having so many conversations lately on forest farming. And I know that it's nothing new. In fact, I mean, it's got to be the oldest type of farming probably. Um, in the history of humans farming, I would assume that forest farming, but it seems to be something that's really being talked about a lot more now. Um, and it's interesting to me that um, the younger people seem to be engaging a lot with the forest farming. Are you seeing that as well with?
Yeah. So like, I do presentations at Organic Grower School, typically every year. And the 2 years previous, before Helene, we had a forest farming track. So I had a
Mhm.
bunch of people, doing presentations on forest farming, and we had a panel discussion, around whatever questions people in the audience had come up. And I do see there seems to be a group of people that are involved in forest farming, and there are younger people who are just starting to catch on to it.
Mhm.
But the people who are actually practicing it seem to be my age and a little bit older. But a lot
Okay.
of these people have, they were interested in farming in the forest. So, like, growing ginseng, golden
Yeah.
seal, those high value crops, really.
Mhm.
So my take on it is that what is missing in this forest that was here previous, and what is dominating the landscape that potentially should not be. Like, take for instance, we have a section of our forest that's mostly white pines, because white pines are one of those pioneer tree species, along with locusts, that come in after,
For
after it's
sure.
been, they ran cattle on one area, and those are the pioneer tree species that come in.
Right.
And it's successions of organisms, just like we were talking about earlier, successions of fungi or plants doing their things throughout the year. This is just on a larger time scale of successions of, some of the pioneer trees, plants coming in, and then the trees come in, and then you eventually get the oaks and the hickories,
Sure.
that come in and, develop that more stable forest.
Mhm.
So I'm more interested in using fungi, fire, water, and selective thinning to design the forest really kind of the way it was pre-European contact, because it was
Yeah.
carefully managed, and a lot of that, in fact, most all of that went away within the last couple hundred years, and
Right.
that had started changing. There's some pollen records actually in eastern Kentucky that came out of this pond. It's like, I think that it started about maybe it's 3 or 5 thousand years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but the pollen record shows that it changed over from pine and cedar forest to oaks, hickories, black walnuts,
Oh,
and chestnut pollen.
yeah.
So the native people, which would have been, partially Cherokee, I don't know if it was some other nation back then, but it would have been also Cherokee, had started managing the landscape
Uh-huh.
more intensely to produce food.
Right.
And so that's what I really, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm going to get a kick. It's getting kickstarted here.
Right.
And my
Right.
wife and I walk in our forest all the time. We talk about what should happen and what should be taken out. And these things are growing too close to each other, and more open landscape, and using fire to regenerate the landscape, as opposed to keep. And on the West Coast, especially in California, they just like no fire, no fire, no fire. And we've
Yeah.
seen the
Oh yeah.
devastation that causes because you have all this dead wood build up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So with the mushrooms that you're trying to propagate, I mean, what would you suggest someone who's maybe has a few acres of forest land and would like to start some mushrooms? Are there ones that are easier to propagate or easier to work with?
Yeah,
Um,
there's some that are, if someone has, so I usually approach it in a couple different ways. If someone has a landscape that has been, say they have a couple acres that was in fields and it's starting to come back in forest, or if they have a couple acres that are fully forested, some of the easiest ones to start, and this is going to be redundant because I think everyone says this, but shiitakes are very easy.
yeah. Yeah.
If you have, and it serves a couple different purposes. You have some logs and you're producing mushrooms on those. And once those logs have finished their cycle of 5, 6, 7 years of production, and that's
Mhm.
the great thing about shiitakes is they produce for 5, 6, 7, 8 years sometimes,
Yeah.
according to the diameter of the log. If the diameter of the log is approximately 6 inches, you can kind of guesstimate that you're going to get about 5 to 6 years of production out of
Really?
those.
Wow.
So it's a long-term food source, and it's a very high quality. I always tell people that fungi are like the highest quality vegetable you could ever get a hold of,
Mm,
but a low quality meat because they don't have nearly the fat content, and the fat is important for us to be able to process the protein. So that's
sure.
important. That's you always saute them in butter or some kind of oil,
Yeah.
duck fat, butter, ghee, avocado oil, whatever your choice is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so that can provide a lot of food for you. And also the forest grown or outdoor grown shiitakes, in my opinion, are far superior to the indoor grown. They have that deeper umami flavor. The
Yeah.
vitamin D content is higher. And right now, this time of year, shiitakes are starting to fruit. And it's one of those things that if you start paying attention to those cycles, shiitakes are easy, and like oysters are fruiting now as well. So you would take those, you would harvest them, you would bring them out in the sun, turn their gills up to the sun for an hour and a half to 2 hours,
Huh.
and the vitamin D content per serving goes from a couple hundred IU's up to anywhere from 12 to 14,000 IU's.
Wow.
So
I
then,
had no
yeah.
idea.
So what you because the ergosterol and fungi serve a similar purpose to our cholesterol. It's used as a building block or used for
Mhm.
repair,
Sure.
and so just like us, when it's exposed to vitamin D, whenever it's exposed to UV light or sunlight, it creates vitamin D. So
Yeah.
ergosterol is kind of a precursor to vitamin D, and you can put these in the sun for an hour and a half, and then once you have them in the sun for that period of time, go ahead and bring them inside, put them in your dehydrator, and finish drying them. You can then grind them up, use them for soups and stews throughout the winter. And vitamin
Yeah.
D doesn't break down very easily, so it's one of those things that it's the perfect time of year to sun treat and dry your mushrooms, because during the winter, when you're not getting outside and getting
Right.
enough vitamin
Right.
D, you are actually getting that from your food.
Oh, I love this. This is so smart.
Yeah, so it's just this is one of the things that I really like teaching medicinal mushrooms about, because like how do you get those nutrients and how do you get those medicinal compounds into your food
Right.
without feeling like you're having to take, some type of medicine.
Right.
Um,
And I have to
so
admit, I'm the type I think of mushrooms only for their taste,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
I don't think about them medicinally, and I obviously, I mean, I know that they are medicinal in that sense, but most of the time I'm just thinking, or how what flavor are they gonna have and how is that gonna add to whatever I'm cooking? But this is really I mean, that's a fantastic way to get your vitamin D in the winter.
yeah, and and even if some of your mushrooms, say, take for instance something like chicken of the woods. I have some chicken of the woods right now that I need to finish processing, but oftentimes you get that in abundance. You'll harvest like 10, 15 pounds or so,
Yeah.
and you can take chicken and chop it up, throw it in a pot of boiling water, boil it for, 15, 20 minutes to help. help start breaking down that chitin in the cell walls, because that's important. Our body cannot break the chitin apart in the cell walls. So that cooking process helps to start weakening those bonds and start breaking that chitin down.
Yeah.
Now, in most fungi, right behind that wall of chitin, there's those other heavier molecular weight polysaccharides. So chitin is a polysaccharide, but there's other ones like polysaccharide crestin, polysaccharide peptide. Those are in turkey
Mhm.
tail. And so when you start breaking down the chitin, you start helping release those other polysaccharides. But with the chicken, what we do is we'll boil it for a little while, we'll bring it out, we'll dehydrate it, and then we'll run it through a food processor until it turns into a powder. And so
Mm.
then you have this very high protein powder that you can use to batter things and fry them. You can use
Oh,
to cut into your flour if you're making like pancakes or you're making like savory breads. So
right.
you're increasing medicinal compounds for your body. And also the chitin, I used to view chitin like 20, 25 years ago as kind of a roadblock to get to those other, what I considered more important compounds. But chitin is very important for your digestive system because it suppresses candida,
Mhm.
but it also feeds like bifidobacteria and lactobacillus. So it can serve as a prebiotic for some of your good gut flora. So that's a really important aspect of why you should also consume like the whole mushroom.
Sure.
Things like reishi or turkey tail are too tough for that. So doing your extraction methods are a fantastic way to utilize
Right.
those. But
Right.
the ones like that are edible, oftentimes running them through a food processor or a blender, even after you've made a soup with them, or you've cooked them down in some water or sauteed them, add some water to it, run them through a food processor or blender, and then pour that in, create a soup. It's a great way to utilize those.
Sure. Sure. And for those of us who do not have a forest to grow our mushrooms, I'm assuming that you can do the same thing with just the mushrooms that you purchase from the farmers markets or from even your wellness stores or things like that, and still do
Yeah.
that. I'm thinking of like the turning it over and letting the gills absorb the vitamin D. That's something that we can do with just purchase mushrooms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You can do that with if you're getting some from a local tailgate market or you're buying them from the grocery store. That's a positive thing you can do. And you can also and I know some people live in places that are considered food deserts. They don't have access to
Yeah.
a lot of really good food. So some of the things like there's a chain of grocery stores around here that they always have portobellos and white buttons and
Yeah.
creminis.
Right.
And that may be the only thing that's available to people. And I always like to tell people this: if you like, so and some people like those mushrooms, and I'm not
Yep.
gonna, that's fine. I'm not raining on your parade of portobellos. Um, but if you do consume those and they're not organic, I always encourage people to scrape the gills out, because those mushrooms do hyperaccumulate heavy metals, but the
Oh,
vast majority of those heavy metals end up being deposited into the gills. And
okay.
so when you scrape the gills out, you're removing 90% or so of those heavy metals that would be in that mushroom. Um,
Oh, that's a fantastic tip. I
So
had
I
no.
think, and one of the reasons I think that fungi, because I've thought about this for years, like why do some fungi, like agaricus species, like the white buttons, why do they, morels also, they accumulate lead 50 to 100 times the background level. So that's a place that
Wow.
you really want to be careful. Like don't harvest them near railroad tracks or old industrial sites or
Huh.
old apple orchards, which oftentimes is where they come up.
Sure.
So back in the early 1900s, people were spraying their apple orchards with arsenic, and so that's still in the soil often,
Right.
and they will accumulate those heavy metals. But I think the reason that, through my observations, what I've seen over the years is that fungus gnats will lay eggs at the base of mushrooms, or there's other, according to what species of mushroom. But what I've noticed is that the larva always tunnel up through the stem or through the cap of, polypores,
Mhm.
shelf fungi, and then they come out of the spore producing surface.
Mm.
And then once they come out, they have eaten their way, and that's the last place they come out is that spore producing surface. So if you're growing portobellos outside and you had fungus gnats or some kind of insect infestation, they would tunnel up, they would come out, and where that spore producing surface is where those heavy metals would accumulate. Those insects would take some of that spore producing surface with them. When they hit the ground, they crawl away from the food source, they pupate, and then they fly away. So
Yeah.
those insects are working to distribute those heavy metals out far and wide. So it's like that old saying that, the solution to pollution is dilution.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Mm.
Um, and I just find it to be fantastic.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Are
that
they is anyone working with mushrooms to clean up sort of brown sites, or is that even a possibility? I can't I
yeah, I think Superfund sites and brownfield sites are, and just toxins in general, microremediation is definitely a thing. I don't know how many people are working on it. I used to be very passionate about it, and I still am, but I really like helping people get healthy.
Yeah.
That seems to be kind of where I find myself continually being drawn to.
Yeah.
But there's just so many different aspects of you have to be healthy to be able to feel good to help clean up the environment. So
Absolutely.
if you don't
Absolutely.
feel good, it all starts with us. If we're not taking care of our bodies and we're not taking
Right.
care of our health and we don't
Right.
have access to proper nutrition, we're just not going to feel good.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, I know there are people working on that.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Once again, I did not realize that mushrooms were able to absorb that, the toxins like that. That's especially when you're saying that 100 times
Yeah,
more than
it's with morels. What I've seen, the numbers are anywhere from 50 to 100 times the background level.
that's incredible.
Yeah, and I
Wow.
noticed deer too. Like here, what I see when I'm hunting morels is oftentimes deer will come by and just nip the tip
Hmm.
of the morel off, and then they
Yeah.
keep moving.
Yeah.
So that's just an interesting observation
Yeah.
that they take a little bit and they keep going.
Huh.
And it's mostly those terrestrial fungi that you get. So they have some sort of ectomycorrhizal. So ecto meaning outside. They have a relationship with the outside of root systems. Uh, we can go into a little deeper at that if you want to. But those ectomycorrhizal fungi that fruit off the forest floor. So like chanterelles,
Uh-huh.
morels. You have like bluets. Um, and a bunch of the boletes and stuff like that. Those are the ectomycorrhizals. Bluets aren't ectomycorrhizal as far as I know. They just like really thick leaf litter is where they usually exist. But bluets do accumulate heavy metals too. So people who are finding them, like they love like where you get thick leaf litter. So ditches or drainages in the forest, but ditches on the sides of the roads. Oftentimes I'll see bluets there, but I won't pick them because the pollution, whatever's on the asphalt or the tarmac that is leaching over into the ditches, they're
Right.
potentially going to lift those heavy metals out of that. And I don't,
Interesting.
it's not a really good place to start hunting mushrooms.
Right. Right. So I want to talk a little bit about your book because we love this book, and I think that it's for the people listening. I think that it's such an amazing educational resource. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your reasons for writing the book, and what people can learn from the book.
Well, I will say that I enjoyed writing this book for the most part. The part that was the cultivation end of it, the connection to the land, that sort of thing for me was the easy part.
Hmm.
going through all the research papers and researching all the mushroom profiles that are in the book. So for those people who don't know, it's kind of I see the book as like a 3-part. So the what we wrote about in the book was the human fungi connection and kind of the blueprint of like how fungi, between fungi, algae, and bacteria, they created the first soils on the planet and allowed everything that's going on the surface of the planet to be happening without them being the decomposers and kind of setting up. I feel strongly that they set the blueprint up
Yeah.
of the life on the planet, because there's so many what's called fractals. If you look at fungi and you look at even nerve tissue, or like it's just a blueprint of that sort of thing that's going on. So we wrote this book with hoping to bring awareness to that, and also the power of fungi, and tried to make the cultivation part as accessible to people with the least amount of equipment as possible. Because I know that if people are interested in growing fungi, like we were talking about earlier, have a small section of forest or even a small city lot that has some shade, they can grow mushrooms. And with this book, we were trying to attract those folks and also attract the people who have a little bit of knowledge around it, but also would like to go a little deeper into it, and also just to have a deeper understanding of the power of fungi, and not only for human health, but planetary health, also being used in industry in some way to benefit people in ways that we typically don't think of fungi as benefiting. So that's kind of the outline of the book, and in a way, it's obviously much deeper than that, but that's kind of the 3 section is the human fungi connection, indigenous practices across. We tried to include as much traditional and indigenous practices and uses of fungi, especially in the profiles, as we possibly could. But with me, so my father is Cherokee, so I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and so there's I've, with that, like there's a lot of fungi. There's a bunch, especially maitake, or we call wishy. Like that's my favorite mushroom.
Yeah.
And so that's a mushroom. Milkies are another one that I don't say everybody, but a lot of people on the boundary still eat a bunch of mushrooms, and slicks, what we call slicks, other people call honey mushrooms. So these are traditional foods, and that knowledge has not been lost, and it's still there, and it's still being practiced today. And as opposed to a lot of East Coast native folks, people on the West Coast, it took longer for Europeans to reach the West Coast. And so I feel like a lot of West Coast native people still have, more of their culture intact. And so just weaving some of the indigenous, some of it's just observations.
Sure.
And some of it's like deeper knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think that's how we re-indigenize too, is we take what we have left over, and then we just spend time with those things, and we pass that knowledge on to other people. And that's how you just you come back to the land, and you study the land, and you study and you study, and and it's, for me, it's like I tell people things that take me 45 seconds to tell them, but it took me 20 years to figure out.
Well,
It's like,
that is the teacher, right? That is
it kind of
what happens with a teacher.
slightly seems unfair.
It does.
I'm like,
right,
it took me like 20 years to figure this out, but let me tell you this in like 10
and
seconds.
how many books I had to read, or how many hours I needed to study to learn what I'm about to tell you in 45 seconds.
Yeah, or things that, I noticed, like in the book, this is one thing that I noticed when I was a kid. I used to watch paper wasp, we call them waspers, like chew on the side of my grandfather's shed back and forth. They would chew to extract the cellulose to then build their nest with. And I noticed that pattern. And then in the forest, once I started harvesting reishi mushrooms, so reishi do this thing where they eject their spores, and then their spores end up landing on top of the cap.
Huh.
And I was like, well, that's an odd thing to do. So I saw this happening years and years and years. And then I noticed that there was some insect that was coming through and eating the spores off the cap, and it was making the same pattern as the wasp would
Yeah.
make on my grandfather's shed. And that's just observation when I was a kid, observation, in my late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And then at some point, someone told me who study Ganoderma, they're like, oh yeah, Ganodermas have they have like maybe a 50% spore germination rate, as opposed to other species like oysters, Pleurotus species have a really high spore germination rate. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why is that? And then I started thinking about how, megafauna, even us, all these animals eat plants, and then the seeds go through their digestive system
Right.
and become scarified.
Yeah.
And then when they come out the other side, they have a higher germination rate. And I'm like, oh, that's what's going on
That's what's happening.
with these insects that are eating the spores.
Yes.
I am certain, I don't have any proof of this, but I think what is happening is that when it goes through the digestive system of that insect, not only are they taking those spores to other places to be deposited, going through their digestive system is also helping those spores germinate at a higher rate. And so there's a deep connection with that insect. It's a food source, and it's also helping spread the fungi around so that they can colonize other trees that are dead or dying,
Sure.
so they can proliferate. So it's all. This is what I'm saying is like we can't, like with the scientific method, reduce it down to these very small things. Like there's a bigger context and picture here, and all of the community members play a part in it.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And there it is. How many years did it take you to sort of realize what was happening there? And it's like, but that's amazing. And of course, the symbiotic relationships between all of the different plants and all the different animals. Like we don't know. I think we have a very small sense of like what is actually happening out there.
Mm.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
incredible, and we're constantly
Well,
learning something new.
yeah, and it's and even stuff like with herbs, like we notice that when we wild harvest certain herbs, they'll have higher or different medicinal compounds than the ones that we farm.
I was just having this conversation with someone to find out if there has been any studies on the efficacy of wild harvested forest grown plants versus what is found on a monocrop farm.
Yeah, so so what I think is happening. It's similar with the Pacific yew tree. There's a compound that was extracted from the Pacific yew, and I think it was called Taxol. I think that's what
Yeah.
but it was used as an anti-cancer drug.
Mhm.
Well, it turns out that the Pacific yew does not make that compound. It's the mycorrhizal fungi that's giving this compound to this tree so that it can fight off whatever it's using it for.
Huh.
And so I think that is the key. Like take for instance, like here, on the East Coast, I'm sure you're aware of that we have a horrible problem with the woolly adelgid killing the hemlock trees, the eastern hemlock. The only places I have seen the eastern hemlock looking like they're doing perfectly fine is always besides very small creeks, like creeks that are oftentimes will dry up whenever it's really dry, but they're there all the time. We have 3 on our farm here right by the driveway. They're perfectly healthy, doing fine. They have the woolly adelgid on them, but they don't die. And I
Huh.
think that in that soil substrate there,
Mhm.
with that consistent moisture, there's some kind of mycorrhizal fungi that is probably giving them a compound that's
Right.
helping them fight off or at least not succumb to the woolly adelgid.
Right. Right.
Um, and so I don't have any proof of this, but it's a suspicion of mine that, but I'm also, like I said, have a really strong tilt towards mycology. So I think that fungi are doing most of the
Well,
work.
I think that there's a lot of studies out there. I know that with trees and transplanting trees, especially if you're in the forest and you transplant trees, that you have to leave a certain amount of the root ball and the soil that's part of that root ball because of the microorganisms that
Mm,
are working with that. Because if you remove all of the soil from the roots and then plant that in just fresh soil, it'll die every
yeah,
time.
yeah,
But if you leave that and it'll build back. And a lot of times it's really interesting. That you have a good micro biome happening with your tree because you'll see mushrooms coming up. And
yeah.
that's an indicator. You're like, oh, I've got a good, it's perfect. That's what I want. And yeah, but I think that you're absolutely correct with that.
Yeah, and I think if we utilize this in the correct way, we can substantially reduce our inputs whenever we are farming.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of utility. Not only that, but also helping us return to being more human. I
Yeah,
think that's the biggest utility that it has, but
sure.
because we don't have to fully understand because I don't think we ever will, because like there's certain fungi, certain mycorrhizal species that exist in different strata of the soil. So when you take
Mhm.
them out of that strata, they just behave completely differently because you've removed them from their community.
Yes, right.
Um,
Exactly.
it's like
It's the same for us too.
yeah, same for
I
us.
read I read recently that 80% of the DNA on us or is not part of us.
Yeah, yeah.
That research recently has shown that our butt we're gonna have to edit that part out. Our gut biome,
Uh huh.
excuse me, actually communicates with our brain.
Yeah,
It is actually communicating back and forth with our brain. That's
yeah.
in that's
Yeah.
incredible. Like,
And
what?
well, I mean, it's one of those things like I consume very little sugar now in my life,
Yeah,
but like take for instance, like, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but I was, back in the '70s. So I was born in '77. I'm 48 now, but back then the doctors were promoting formula for
yeah,
babies.
yes,
They were
absolutely.
not promoting being breastfed, and
Right.
so with you don't get these oligosaccharides that are important to feed the gut flora so that you develop the correct gut flora to help you withstand being sick, all these problematic things that come into your life, all these pathogens that
Yeah,
potentially you come in contact with later. um, and so I think that that's where my addiction to sugar originated from, was
of
being fed
course.
those sugar heavy formulas whenever
Uh-huh.
I was a baby.
Right.
Because I struggled with it for a long time. And it was like, I mean, it would you know, it would start talking to me in
Oh,
the
yeah.
evening, like, oh, there's some cookies over here, or there's some like
Oh,
honey
yeah.
over here, and
Right.
it's like it controlled my brain for a while. And it was like,
Yeah.
so I totally get it, and I have
Yeah.
experienced that as well.
So what's on the horizon for you? What's gonna happen next?
Well, so what we, so Catherine and I, my wife, have since we produced this book, we decided that it was time to start an online community and a course. So
Nice.
in January, we are launching a 1 year long certification course in mushroom cultivation.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it is, and I think the real value of this is it lasts for a full year. We are there to support people. We want to see more people producing mushrooms. We want, especially in areas that are underserved.
Yeah.
So we are wanting to, help people in impoverished communities, communities that do not have access to good health care or
Yeah.
good food.
Right.
And there's always waste products that people can use, and that's part of the model of mycology. Really is turning waste into high protein and medicinally dense foods.
Yeah.
So we're launching this course in January. We have registration open now. Going to be doing a few podcasts, a few book signings, but that's the big thing. And then the following year, we're also going to be launching a co-wild tending course that is also a year. And that co-wild tending is more working in and with the forest to regenerate the forest, to return the forest back to somewhat of, some version of indigenous agriculture, and helping people understand the aspects of that. And with obviously that's going to have a tilt towards mycology and, utilizing some of those tools as far as, using fire on the landscape, etc. So that's the exciting thing, and also the thing that keeps me nervous. But I think the real value in this course is that it's going to be online, so it's going to be accessible to a lot of people. We're also trying to keep it affordable so that we can pay our bills and also we can help people get started.
Sure.
But the great thing about it is, like, we're going to be there once a week for calls so that people can get all of their questions answered.
Yeah.
We ship them products so they can get started. And then that's the real value in it. Once a week, I'm there to answer all the questions.
Yeah.
And so it's like coaching every week.
Right.
So we're dedicated to getting people to actually be successful in this. And by the time they finish half the course, they should have already made enough money with selling fungi or, selling fresh mushrooms or selling products to pay for the course. So, So that's kind of our idea around that. And there's not anyone offering, a year-long course like this. And I definitely don't think there's anyone who has 30 plus years of experience that is teaching anything like this out there. So it's very unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those listening out there, this is definitely one of those that AI is not going to take away from you very soon.
Right.
So,
yeah.
If you're looking for that transition, this might be it.
Yeah. And I feel strongly that that's going to be the thing that saves us from AI, because there's the potential for it to be very scary. It's a hell of a tool, but it also has a lot of scary aspects to it. Absolutely. And getting your feet on the ground, getting your hands in the soil, getting your hands back out into the forest I think it's the solution to that.
Well, I think reconnecting with nature might be the solution for a lot of our problems.
Oh my gosh.
Really do.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, thank you so much for this. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm so happy that I got to hang out with you for an hour or so.
Great. Well, yeah, I had a fantastic time as well. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate y'all having, given me this opportunity to speak to you and, kind of share some of my unique ideas and, around mycology and
Well, we love what you're doing, and we're going to link to your site, to your book, and encourage everyone listening to please check it out, because you're doing wonderful, wonderful work and such an incredible wealth of knowledge. So we so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And we'll talk very, very soon.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, I hope you have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.